You know the name, Dr. Julian Croft. You've seen him on TV, looking impossibly young for a man in his 50s, with a smile that could sell salvation. He's the celebrity doctor, the longevity guru, the man who promises the world's elite what they want most: more time. His clients are billionaires, aging movie stars, tech moguls, all flocking to his exclusive, secretive clinic for his revolutionary Elysian Treatment. The public sees him as a visionary. The medical establishment calls him a charlatan. But nobody knows what he actually does. His clinic, the Wellspring, isn't in Beverly Hills or Geneva. It's on a repurposed deep-sea oil rig, 100 miles off the coast of California, a fortress of science and secrecy in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. My name is Leo Turner. I used to be a respected medical journalist. Used to be. A bad story, a burned source, and now I write freelance fluff pieces to pay the rent. 2 weeks ago, I got an anonymous email, a former nurse from the Wellspring. She told me Croft's miracle cure wasn't a cure at all. She said it was something else, something he'd found in the abyss, something ancient and alive. She said the fountain of youth was real, and it was parasitic. So I cashed in every favor I had, emptied my bank account, and booked myself a 1-week stay at the Wellspring under a false identity. I'm flying out there now, posing as a washed-up tech millionaire desperate to turn back the clock. I came here to get the story that will resurrect my career. What you're about to hear are the recordings I made during that week. I don't know if they'll ever leave this rig. The treatment works, you see. It really does. But the price is your humanity. The helicopter ride is the first part of the psychological conditioning. For 2 hours, you see nothing but the endless, empty blue of the Pacific Ocean. It's designed to make you feel small, isolated, to strip away the world you knew. Then it appears on the horizon, a black, skeletal tower of steel rising from the water, part futuristic hospital, part industrial prison, the Wellspring. As we landed on the helipad, the air changed. It was cold, clean, and heavy with the smell of salt and sterile ozone. I was greeted not by a doctor, but by a woman in a sleek white uniform whose smile never quite reached her eyes. She escorted me inside. The interior was an exercise in minimalist, unnerving luxury. Gleaming white corridors, floors made of polished concrete, and massive floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto the churning gray sea. There were no paintings on the walls, no decorations. It was like a luxury hotel designed by a surgeon. The only sound was the distant rhythmic crash of waves against the rig's steel legs. My room was just as sterile, a white-on-white box with a bed, a chair, and a window that stared into the abyss. There was no television, no radio, no internet access. External stimuli interfere with the treatment, the smiling woman had explained. Here, you will find perfect peace. Later that day, I met him, Dr. Julian Croft. He was even more striking in person, radiating a kind of calm, predatory confidence. He explained the treatment in soothing, vague terms: cellular regeneration, gene expression, resetting the biological clock. It was a masterful performance.
"The first infusion is tonight, Leo," he said, his eyes a piercing, intelligent blue. "You'll feel a little disoriented at first. That's normal. It's just your body remembering what it was like to be young." I went in looking for a monster, but as I lay there that evening, a serene nurse injecting a faintly bioluminescent pearlescent fluid into my veins, I didn't feel fear. I felt hope. As the fluid entered my system, a strange, pleasant warmth spread through my body. The ever-present ache in my lower back, a companion for the last 10 years, simply vanished. It was working. It was a miracle. And that was the most terrifying thing of all.
I woke up the next morning feeling new. That's the only word for it. The chronic fog of middle age had lifted from my brain. My joints didn't ache. My vision seemed sharper, the whites of my eyes clearer. I felt like I was 25 again. Croft's treatment wasn't just working, it was a revelation. For a dangerous moment, I forgot why I was really here. I went to the communal dining hall for breakfast. It was a vast, sunlit room with a panoramic window overlooking the endless ocean. Here, I saw the other patients for the first time. There were about a dozen of them, all glowing with the same impossible vitality I now felt. I recognized a few faces from the news. A tech billionaire who was supposedly in his 70s but looked 40. A famously reclusive actress who hadn't been seen in public for a decade. They were all beautiful, serene, and unnervingly perfect. The atmosphere was one of placid, dreamlike contentment. The conversations were light, the laughter soft. But as I sat there, a knot of unease began to tighten in my stomach. I noticed the small things. Everyone, without exception, was drinking tall glasses of water that had a faint, pearlescent shimmer. No one was drinking coffee or tea. Then came the incident. A staff member, walking by our table, accidentally dropped a silver tray. It hit the concrete floor with a deafening, explosive clatter. I jumped in my seat, my heart slamming against my ribs. But the famous actress I was talking to didn't even flinch. Her serene smile didn't waver. I looked around the room. Not a single patient had reacted. No startled gasps, no turned heads. They continued their calm conversations, as if the sound had never happened. Their startle reflexes were completely gone. I tried to dismiss it. A side effect of the treatment, perhaps? A state of medically induced calm? But as I watched them, over the next hour, I saw something else that I couldn't explain away. One by one, in the middle of a sentence or a laugh, each patient would pause. They would slowly turn their head towards the massive window, their eyes fixed on the dark, churning ocean below. They would hold that gaze for 3, 4, 5 seconds, their faces blank. It was like they were listening to a sound I couldn't hear. Then, just as slowly, they would turn back to their conversations, picking up exactly where they left off, as if nothing had happened. It was a silent, synchronized, and deeply unnatural ritual. They were all answering the same silent call from the deep.
That night, sleep didn't come. The miraculous effects of the treatment were now tainted by the deep, chilling strangeness of the other patients. Their placid smiles and synchronized ocean-gazing ritual haunted me. This wasn't a clinic. It was a human terrarium, and I had the growing fear that Dr. Croft was cultivating something other than youth. My journalistic instincts, dormant for too long, finally kicked back in. I had to see what was happening here when the patients were asleep and the smiling staff were off duty. Around 2 a.m., I slipped out of my room. The white corridors were bathed in a low, sterile blue light, and the only sound was the ever-present hum of the rig's life support and the crashing waves below. It felt like I was moving through the belly of some great, sleeping beast. I had no plan, just a need to see the parts of the rig that weren't on the official tour. I found a service elevator and, using a keycard I'd managed to clone earlier, I took it down, past the residential and medical floors, to the lower decks. The moment the doors opened, the atmosphere changed. The luxury vanished, replaced by raw, industrial steel. This was the working part of the oil rig. The air was cold, damp, and heavy with the smell of brine and machine oil. The corridors were narrow, dimly lit catwalks over a cavernous, dark space. From below, I could hear a new sound, a deep, rhythmic, pulsing hum, like a giant, slow heartbeat. It was the source of the sound I'd heard on the first night, but much closer now. As I crept along the catwalk, I saw them. Down on the main deck below, maybe 50 feet down, stood the patients. All of them. They were dressed in simple white gowns, standing in a loose circle, their heads tilted back, their faces pointed towards the open center of the rig, where the original drill would have descended into the sea. They were motionless like statues in the moonlight, seemingly oblivious to the cold and the roaring wind. They were holding another silent communion with the abyss.
As I watched from the shadows of the catwalk, my heart a cold stone in my chest, a new figure emerged onto the deck below. It was Dr. Croft. He moved among his placid, staring patients with the calm authority of a priest tending to his flock. He wasn't one of them. He was their shepherd. He walked to the center of the circle and knelt before a large circular opening in the rig's floor, the moon pool. From it, a faint, pearlescent, bioluminescent light pulsed in time with the deep, humming sound that vibrated through the entire structure. This was the source of the treatment. Croft began to speak, his voice a low, reverent chant, easily carried on the wind. He wasn't speaking English. It was a guttural, clicking language, a series of sounds that felt impossibly ancient, like the shifting of tectonic plates. As he chanted, the light from the moon pool intensified, and from the dark, churning water, something began to rise. It wasn't a monster of tentacles and teeth. It was a network. A vast, intricate, beautiful, and horrifying web of fine, glowing, pearlescent filaments, like a giant, living neural network, pulsing with a soft, internal light. It was a single, colossal, biological organism, and Croft was communicating with it.
I frantically raised my phone, its camera the only part of me that was still functioning, and started recording. This was it. This was the story. This was the secret of the Wellspring. Croft wasn't a doctor. He was a high priest, and his god was a living, thinking organism that slept in the abyss. The Elysian Treatment wasn't a cure. It was a communion, a sacrament that made his patients part of the hive mind, connecting them to the ancient consciousness in the deep.
I filmed for what felt like an eternity. My phone, the only thing separating me from the sheer, mind-breaking insanity of the scene below. Croft's guttural chant, the pulsing, organic light, the silent, worshipping patience. It was a nightmare made real. Then, one of the white uniformed staff members standing near Croft looked up, her head tracking a random arc across the dark catwalks, her eyes, impossibly, locked directly onto mine. There was no shout of alarm, no panic. Her placid expression simply vanished, replaced by a cold, blank look of recognition. She raised a single, graceful hand and pointed directly at me. In perfect, silent unison, every patient on the deck below turned from the moon pool and tilted their heads back. A dozen pairs of eyes, all empty and aware, stared up at me. The hive had been alerted. I didn't wait. I scrambled back from the railing and ran, my boots clanging on the steel catwalks. Behind me, I could hear movement, not a panicked pursuit, but the calm, efficient, and perfectly synchronized footsteps of the staff members ascending the service stairs. They weren't chasing me, they were herding me. As I sprinted through the cold, labyrinthine corridors, a wave of dizziness washed over me. The deep, pulsing hum from the moon pool no longer felt like just a sound. It felt like a pull, a beckoning. My own body, my own traitorous cells felt an urge to turn back, to join the communion. A sudden, violent thirst burned in my throat, a craving for something cold and briny. I finally reached the service elevator, fumbling with the keycard as the synchronized footsteps grew closer. The doors hissed open, and I threw myself inside, slamming the button for my floor. As the doors slid shut, I saw two of them, their faces serene and utterly inhuman, rounding the corner. I made it back to my room, locking the door and shoving a chair against it for good measure. I was safe, for now. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I leaned against the cold glass of my room's massive window, trying to catch my breath and make sense of what I had seen. That's when I saw my own reflection in the dark glass, my face pale in the moonlight. I looked into my own eyes, and a new, profound wave of terror washed over me. In the center of my irises, a faint, almost imperceptible pearlescent shimmer was glowing softly in the dark. The treatment wasn't just in my veins, it was in my eyes. The story was inside me.
The night became a battle fought within the confines of my own skull. The pearlescent shimmer in my eyes was a constant, mocking reminder that the enemy was no longer outside. It was in my blood, in my cells, in the very wiring of my brain. The deep, pulsing hum from the abyss was a constant, seductive whisper, urging me to return, to join the silent, staring congregation. My body rebelled against me. The thirst for salt water became a maddening physical ache. The soft blue light of my room's control panel felt painfully bright, and I found myself instinctively drawn to the darkness, to the corner of the room furthest from the window. Worse, I began to get echoes. Fleeting images flashed behind my eyes, the strange, beautiful patterns of deep-sea life, the feeling of immense pressure, a sense of timeless, patient waiting. They weren't my memories. They were whispers from the hive mind, the first trickles of the creature's ancient consciousness seeping into my own. I was on a clock. I didn't know how long I had until Leo Turner was just a shell, another placid guest at Croft's eternal spa. My only goal, the one thing I clung to with the last vestiges of my identity, was the video on my phone, the proof. Escape was impossible. The rig was a steel island, and they were the sharks in the water. But I didn't need to escape. I just needed my story to escape. I remembered the briefing materials I'd studied from my cover identity. The rig had a long-range communication center on the top deck, a direct satellite uplink to the mainland, to be used only in dire emergencies. This qualified as a dire emergency. My plan was simple and suicidal. I had to get from my room on the residential deck to the comm center on the command deck, bypass their security, and upload the video. I had to do it while fighting the unnaturally coordinated staff, the other patients, and the growing alien instincts of my own body. I looked at my reflection again. The shimmer was more noticeable now, a faint, milky nebula in my eyes. I had to go. I had to go now. Another night on this rig, and there wouldn't be enough of me left to even try.
With my phone clutched in my hand like a holy relic, I took a deep breath and opened my door, peering into the corridor. The sterile, blue-lit hallway was no longer empty. 2 of the white uniformed staff were patrolling, but not like any guards I'd ever seen. They moved in a slow, flowing, perfectly synchronized pattern, one turning left as the other turned right, their steps completely silent on the polished floor. It was like watching a pair of dancers performing a silent, deadly ballet. This was the Hive in action. They knew there was a rogue element. They were antibodies searching for the infection, and the infection was me. I waited in the darkness of my doorway, my heart hammering. My only chance was to make it to the central elevator bank, the only way up to the command deck and the comms room. I watched them, learning their rhythm. After a full minute of their silent patrol, they both stopped. In perfect unison, they turned their heads toward the nearest floor-to-ceiling window and stood motionless, listening to the ocean. This was my chance. I slipped out of my room and darted across the corridor, ducking behind a large, white, minimalist sculpture. The hum from the abyss was a siren song in my blood, trying to pull me out of the shadows, trying to make me join them. I had to physically bite my own tongue to keep from stepping out into the open. After 10 seconds, their silent communion ended, and the patrol resumed.
I moved like a ghost, darting from cover to cover, using their strange rhythmic pauses to my advantage. It took me what felt like an hour to cross 100 feet of hallway. Finally, I saw it, the soft, glowing light of the elevator bay at the end of the corridor. I was almost there. I waited for one last pause, one last moment of ocean gazing, and then I made a break for it, running the last 20 feet on silent feet. I skidded to a halt in front of the polished steel doors, my hand outstretched to press the button, but I didn't have to. With a soft, pneumatic hiss, the elevator doors slid open in front of me as if they'd been waiting. Standing inside, bathed in the soft white light of the lift, was the famous actress. Her smile was gone. Her face was a blank, empty mask, and her eyes, glowing with that faint pearlescent shimmer, were looking directly at me with a cold, piercing intelligence. She knew. The hive knew. And it was waiting for me.
We stood there for a silent, frozen moment. Me in the dark, red-lit corridor, her in the sterile white box of the elevator. Her face was as placid and empty as a doll's. She didn't move. She didn't even seem to be breathing. Then a voice spoke, but her lips didn't move. It was a soft, layered whisper that seemed to come not just from her, but from the very air inside the elevator. It was the sound of a dozen voices speaking in perfect, eerie unison. "Leo, why are you struggling?" The collective voice was calm, almost gentle, yet it carried an immense, ancient weight. It was the voice of the hive, the voice of the god in the water. You felt the gift. The pain is gone. The fear is gone. We are offering you peace, an end to the lonely noise of a single mind. We are offering you connection. Why do you run from perfection? Every word was a temptation, a siren song custom-made for the broken, ambitious man I was. It promised a quiet end to all my struggles. I could feel my own treated cells vibrating in sympathy, wanting to agree, wanting to step into the light and let the great silent ocean of consciousness wash over me. But the last stubborn fragment of Leo Turner, the disgraced journalist, refused to die. "I'm not you," I gasped, my voice a ragged whisper. I lunged forward, not at her, but at the small, circular, glowing patch on the side of her neck, the infusion port where the treatment was administered. It was her connection to the hive. It was her antenna. My fingers closed around the slick biogel patch, and I tore it away. The actress didn't scream in pain. Her body went rigid, convulsing violently. The chorus of whispers in the air was replaced by a deafening psychic shriek of pure static that made my teeth ache. Her eyes, which had been fixed on me with a cold intelligence, rolled back in her head, the pearlescent shimmer fading. She collapsed to the floor of the elevator, not unconscious, but empty. A puppet with its strings cut. I didn't waste a second. I scrambled over her and slammed the button for the command deck. As the elevator doors began to slide shut, I looked out into the corridor. Down the long, red-lit hallway, a dozen figures, patients and staff, had emerged from their rooms.
They were all walking towards me with the same calm, synchronized, and impossibly silent grace. The hive was coming. I was just a rogue cell, and the entire organism was now moving to purge me.
The elevator ascended with a gentle, silent hum, a stark contrast to the chaos in my own body and mind. The psychic static from severing the actress's connection echoed in my skull like a phantom limb, a painful, tearing sensation. My own internal link to the hive felt raw, exposed. The thirst was no longer a craving, it was a fire in my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut and was assaulted by a dizzying flash of an alien memory, the feeling of crushing, deep-sea pressure and a vast, cold, timeless peace. My body wanted to surrender. It wanted to go home. No, I thought, the word a desperate anchor in a swirling sea of alien consciousness. My name is Leo Turner. I am a journalist. I have a story to tell. I repeated it over and over, a mantra to keep the encroaching ocean at bay. The elevator chimed softly, a sound of gentle, indifferent arrival. The doors hissed open. They were waiting for me. The corridor on the command deck was wider than the ones below, lined with dark polished steel, and standing in the middle of it, blocking my path to the communications room, was a silent assembly. A dozen patients and staff standing in a perfect, symmetrical formation, as if arranged for a ceremony. They didn't move. They didn't rush me. They just stood there, a silent, living wall, their shimmering, empty eyes all fixed on me. At their head stood the woman who had first greeted me on the helipad, her smile now completely gone. Her face was a mask of cold, divine authority. The layered, whispering voice of the hive emanated from the air around her, no longer seductive, but filled with an icy, absolute resolve. The rogue cell will be brought back into harmony. You are a discordant note in the great silence. The song cannot continue until you are tuned. The living wall of bodies took a single, perfectly synchronized step towards me. They were done persuading. Now they were going to absorb me.
There was no negotiation. The wall of bodies moved towards me, not with a rush, but with a slow, inevitable, flowing motion. Their steps were silent, their expressions blank. They weren't trying to hurt me, not in a human way. They were just correcting a mistake, absorbing a rogue element. I shoved the first one, a young man who looked like a model. It was like pushing a statue. He barely moved, his balance perfect. Another two flanked me, their movements unnervingly graceful, their hands reaching for my arms. There was no anger, no exertion, just a calm, coordinated, and utterly terrifying efficiency. I was a frantic, struggling animal caught in the gears of a silent, perfect machine. The hive mind was their strength, but I realized in a flash of desperate inspiration that it might also be their weakness. It was a symphony. What happens when you blast a symphony with pure, chaotic noise?
My eyes darted around the steel corridor, and I saw it, a small red box on the wall, the rig's emergency flare and alarm system. I threw all my weight into a desperate shove, breaking free from their placid grip for a single second. I lunged for the box, smashed the glass with my elbow, and slammed my hand down on the activation button. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. A deafening industrial alarm, loud enough to tear the air apart, blared through the corridor. Simultaneously, a series of strobe lights on the ceiling erupted, flooding the space with a painful, blinding, chaotic pulse of pure white light. The hive convulsed. The silent, graceful wall of bodies shattered, their placid faces contorted in agony. Their hands flew to their heads, their synchronized movements breaking into violent individual seizures. The chaotic, overwhelming sensory input was a virus in their shared consciousness, and the network was crashing. They were no longer a wall. They were just a writhing, twitching crowd of broken dolls. I staggered through them, my own head pounding from the strobing light and the deafening noise, and saw my goal at the end of the hall, a heavy, soundproofed steel door marked Communications. I had a clear path, but the alarm was now a screaming beacon, telling Croft and anyone else left on this rig exactly where I was.
I stumbled through the spasming, twitching bodies, the strobing light and blaring alarm creating a disorienting, hellish landscape. I reached the communications room door, a slab of reinforced steel, and slammed my ploned keycard against the reader. The lock beeped, denied. The alarm had triggered a secondary lockdown. My own mind was a war zone. The psychic static from the convulsing hive was a physical pain, a high-frequency drill boring into my skull. The thirst was a living thing, clawing at my throat. For a horrifying second, I saw not the steel door, but a beautiful, peaceful, dark abyss of water. Just let go, the alien thought whispered in my own voice. Let go and join the silence. I roared, a raw animal sound of defiance, and slammed my shoulder into the door's control panel, cracking the housing. Wires sparked. The lock, short-circuited, disengaged with a heavy clunk. I threw the door open and staggered inside, sealing it behind me. Silence. The thick, soundproofed walls cut off the deafening alarm, leaving only the quiet, steady hum of the electronics within. The room was the rig's nerve center, a dark, circular space filled with racks of servers and monitors displaying satellite paths, weather charts, and deep-sea sonar readings. In the center was the main console, the rig's sole link to the world I had left behind. My hands were shaking, my vision shimmering at the edges with a pearlescent haze, but I forced myself to work. I plugged my phone into the console, its cracked screen lighting up with the damning evidence. I started the upload, my fingers fumbling as I bypassed firewalls and routed the signal to an anonymous cloud server I kept for emergencies. The file was huge. The connection was slow. A progress bar appeared on the screen, a tiny sliver of hope in the darkness. Uploading evidence.mp4. 1%. It was working. It was agonizingly slow, but it was working. Then, a sound from the steel door behind me. A deep, resonant thump. I spun around.
Silence. Then another thump. It wasn't the frantic pounding of a fist. It was the slow, methodical, and impossibly powerful impact of something that knew with absolute certainty that the door would not hold forever. Croft had found me.
The slow, heavy impacts on the steel door continued, each one making the metal groan. Then Croft's voice came through the door's intercom, unnervingly calm and clear. "Leo, I'm not angry, just disappointed. You felt the miracle, the end of all human suffering. Why would you choose to return to the pain, to the noise?" The upload progress bar crept to 15%.
With a final, deafening shriek of tearing metal, the lock on the door burst inward. Croft stepped through the mangled opening. He wasn't armed. He didn't need to be. His eyes shimmered with a deep, pearlescent light. He was no longer just the high priest. He was a true apostle. "There's nowhere to run," he said calmly. "The ocean is deep, and the flesh is a temporary vessel." The upload hit 31%.
I threw a heavy fire extinguisher at him. He swatted it out of the air with a casual, almost lazy motion, his speed and strength completely inhuman. He moved towards me, and the internal pull to join him, to surrender to the hive, became an overwhelming physical command. My own body was trying to kneel. I was losing the fight on every front. The upload crawled to 45%.
I knew I couldn't beat him, but I could still destroy his god. My eyes darted to a schematic on one of the monitors, the rig's primary power core located directly beneath us. The comms room had an emergency release valve for it, a way to trigger a catastrophic overload. If I couldn't save myself, I could at least burn the infection out of the sea. The upload ticked past 60%.
I lunged for the console, not to check the upload, but for the red, glass-covered switch labeled Core Purge. For the first time, Croft's serene expression broke. A look of pure, animal panic flashed across his face as he realized what I was about to do. He screamed in that guttural, clicking language I'd heard before and charged, his inhuman speed now fueled by fury.
His fingers closed around my throat, lifting me off the ground. My vision started to go dark. "You can't!" he shrieked, his voice a mix of English and the alien clicks. "It is a new genesis, a beautiful silent birth." With the last of my strength, I stretched my arm, my fingers inches from the switch. The upload, 88%. My fingers smashed the glass and flipped the switch. A deep, seismic shudder ran through the entire rig. Croft dropped me, his face a mask of horror as a deafening alarm blared. Red lights flashed. A voice from the speakers repeated, "Core meltdown imminent." The rig was tearing itself apart. The upload reached 100% just as the console exploded in a shower of sparks. The floor beneath me gave way.
As I fell into the roaring chaos of the collapsing rig, I saw it. The moon pool below erupted, not with water, but with pure pearlescent light. The creature, the hive mind, drawn up by the surge of energy, revealed a fraction of its true, colossal, and impossibly beautiful form for a single blinding moment. Then the world turned white.
Weeks later, a deep-sea submersible explores the wreckage of the Wellspring, thousands of feet beneath the surface. The pilot logs the strange, organic-looking corrosion on the steel. As the sub's camera pans across a piece of the comms room, a faint, pearlescent shimmer flickers across its lens. Inside the cockpit, the pilot's screens all flash with a single simple text message before going dark. Connection established.
The signal was sent. The connection was made. And now the story is out there, waiting in the deep, a ghost in the ocean, looking for a new machine to call home. If you believe warnings like this need to be heard, let the algorithm know by hitting the like button. Some things shouldn't be left buried in the dark. And if you want to be ready for the next story that crawls out of the abyss, you need to subscribe and turn on all notifications. There are more secrets out there, more experiments. You'll want to be the first to know when the next signal comes through. Think about it. What other horrors has humanity created and then forgotten about in the lonely places of the world? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, stay vigilant.